Are you ready to embark on a transformative journey of rebuilding your life? Look no further than the Rebuild Podcast. Join us as we dive deep into conversations that nurture personal and spiritual growth. Through the wisdom of the Word of God and practical applications, we'll guide you towards becoming the best version of yourself. On this podcast, we will delve into a variety of topics and insights, ranging from mental and emotional well-being to personal development and spiritual growth. Together, we'll explore the paths to healing, resilience, and the restoration of inner peace. Subscribe now and let's rebuild our lives together, one uplifting conversation at a time.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Rebuild Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Romey, and today I'd like to talk about faith and finances. Most of us would talk about this from the standpoint of prosperity. Okay, I really want this to be more about faith and finances more so than prosperity. A lot of why I would speak on that as opposed to the concept of prosperity is we don't want the notion of prosperity to be considered or to be looked at or viewed at as an idol, right? I know for a lot of us, we talk about receiving abundance, living in abundance, being wealthy and things along that line. And there's nothing wrong with having goals of being, well off, and there's no real problem with having, the prosperity, quote unquote, if you will, from the standpoint of building it, right? But a lot of us, without realizing it, we're so exposed, and we've been pushed a lot of doctrine and kind of becoming more so indoctrinated with the notion and the idea and the movement of prosperity to the point that, a lot of us really lose sight on a lot of the rest of the principles that come with God's will and purpose. And I really don't want to add to that, right? I really want us to understand, again, faith and being financially responsible. Okay, that is far more of an important thing than trying to push or preach prosperity. Like, prosperity is great, but it can and will do a lot of damage if we're not, grounded appropriately. Okay. There's also a huge misconception with regard to, prosperity, that we're all supposed to have that prosperity. Right, a lot of us, we're following behind a lot of pastors, a lot of ministers, and evangelicals that push that, that want us to believe that we're all purposed to be millionaires and billionaires. And while that would be great for, every nation's GDP, and we would have and solve a lot of our issues and problems, but the realism is, this notion, this currency, this particular topic, if you will, whatever you want to call it, it is limited, right? Especially in terms of the way that it's perceived, the way that it's looked, the way that it's made, the way that it's backed, right? And you can see where that goes. So we don't really have to delve too far into that, right? We don't want to teach that misconception that everybody should have it, because then it can cause a lot of extra problems on top of all of that, right? Another misconception that we have too, it kind of flows on the extreme opposite end of this spectrum, and that is, being in the faith we're not supposed to have. In fact, I remember watching a comedian's routine, and in his routine, he's actually explaining this, and it was unfortunate that, the notion that he was utilizing was, there was a pastor that was speaking, and the way that he was dressed and the way that he looked, he looked very, very, very well off. And, he's kind of pushing, I guess he was pushing more so, the prosperity aspect, I guess, and it didn't really, it really didn't hit as appropriately, I guess. But then his lead-in after that, or his segue after that was, the only way that he could really take into consideration or believing that the person who's really following after Christ is, being poor, if you will. It really, reiterates that misconception that, oh, well, you have to be poor in order to follow Christ, right? Because if you're rich in following Christ, then obviously you're pimping us for our money, and we don't want to, that's a whole different conversation for a whole different day. But we don't want to, deal with the idea or the notion. We don't want to create that misconception that you have to be poor to be in the body. But I also don't want to create that misconception that you have to be super wealthy to be in the body as well, right? Because one, God is open to everyone, but two, we don't want to drag people into becoming or thinking that they have to be super rich or super poor to fulfill God's will and purpose. We're supposed to do that according to our measure of faith and what God gives us. Okay. We also understand that there are a lot of principles on prosperity. We have to be very mindful of how to balance all of that stuff out. Right? So when we talk about prosperity, do understand prosperity is not, again, being millionaires and billionaires. It's about, it's about the measure of faith. Okay, so if my measure of faith and where I'm at caps off at a healthy 5 to 6 figure lifestyle, that's cool. And I'm not saying it to put into light that the lifestyle has to be a 5, 6, 7 whatever figure lifestyle. What I'm saying is, if I'm comfortable here and where I'm trying to go is here, or I'm only as far as fulfilling God's will and purpose, and that keeps me here, then that's that's where I need to be. I don't need to try to become bigger and greater. I know for a lot of us, we kind of argue that with regard to the standpoint of ambition and drive and all of that. And the downside to that is we can bend again to that kind of that trend, and that could hurt us, right? Because again, you're talking about now you're talking about living. You can live above your means, and that can really put you in a very big compromise, right? We don't want to do that, right? We do have our responsibilities, and I understand that, and we have to have resources necessary to build on top of all of that. But again, that is all a part of God's will and purpose, as much as it is a part of us being able to build according to His process. Right? This is actually one of those subjects that a lot of us are, we're being taught more so about working a fast track, more so than allowing the process to be what it needs to be. Right? When we talk about healing, we talk about the struggles, we talk about the curses and things of that sort. A lot of us will allow the process to be the process, but when it comes to this particular subject, we can and will push a narrative that really can fast track the process. Again, that's not God's will and purpose. God's will and purpose is all about order and decency. So we have to go along with that. And I'm going to start this off really quick with particular verses to speak on. I'll elaborate on them real quick before we get into the meat and potatoes of this thing. I do have a couple of questions that I want to address kind of towards the end after I get through the core discussion, if you will. So you can consider those questions kind of like an interview kind of thing, I guess. And then, we'll go ahead and close this thing out. But I will say again, I don't want, and I'm not trying to condone the norm, right? That we can all have that prosperity and we're all supposed to be millionaires and billionaires. I know that that's one of the things that we push. We push financial blessings and financial miracles and wonders and all of that. I get it, but we have to be mindful of that, especially when we're talking about the rest of God's will and purpose in our lives, as much as we talk about our own health and well-being and wellness in a well-rounded sense. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this thing before I end up talking too long about this. So Proverbs 3, 9 and 10 say this: honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Deuteronomy 8 and 18 says this: but remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth, confirming His covenant that He swore to your ancestors as it is today. And then Philippians 4:19 says this: and my God will meet all of your needs according to His glorious riches in Christ Jesus. Okay, when we break these down, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. This is this is kind of a gloss over of a concept that we're familiar with, right? That's called tithing, right? Anytime we hear about first fruits, we've heard that in the very beginning with Cain and Abel, right? We've seen this with regard to Abraham and his situation. He had, he went to battle with other groups of leaders, and they were, they took back something that was essentially taken from them. Abraham took what was necessary, and the rest of it, the rest of it was for the people. You see that with Jacob when he lays down the rod. He makes the promise to God that whatever he gets, he's going to give him, a portion of that. But we see it, commonplace throughout the Old Testament. Whenever there is a first fruit, we're supposed to give accordingly, right? We're supposed to give that first fruit, that new, the best or the choice, right? And that is to showcase again gratitude. That it's also to, as you would really want to call it, like paying a tax, right? In showcasing that we're doing what we are purposed to do with what we have. Right, moving forward, again, God will see to it that the rest will be utilized appropriately. Now, it does say that your barns will be overflowing, your vats will brim over, and that can be a literal. That could also be a metaphoric, right? Expression, right? The literal, we might have overflow, right? And rightfully so, because you're honoring God, you're paying, you're giving the sacrifice, you're giving God what is His, you're paying a tax. And do understand that there is a difference between stewardship and ownership, which we'll talk about in the core discussion. But when we're giving accordingly, He will allow stretch or sustain for everything else to be taken care of appropriately, right? This could also be tied into being able to help us, right? Because we have our own things that we have to deal with, our traumas, our issues, our problems, our bloodline, curses and things of the sort, right? So whatever he gives us in return, it's going to be utilized for a greater good, right? That is what that can refer to. Now we can, like I said, we can take that literal, right? The overflowing, allowing the resources to be stretched out and utilized and really put into a good use, if you will. But it can also be metaphoric for other things, right? But we do have to understand that we have a part to play, right? We can't just give God a little bit and then we're trying to hold on to survival, if you will. Oh, I'm only going to do this because I still have to do this, and this, right? Because that hurts us in the process. But we do know, right, that as we're sacrificing, as we're giving, as we're making this thing about God and following God's principles, then God will honor as His word states. Okay. In Deuteronomy, when we talk about Deuteronomy, right, remembering the Lord, because it's Him that's giving us this wealth, if you will, confirming the covenant that He swore to our ancestors as it is today. Again, that is referring back to Jacob and Abraham. You're talking about going back to Isaac, and you see, even again with Cain and Abel, you see what that looks like, where you see the measure of whenever we're given something, right? God, again, we have to hold our end to these deals, but when we're giving that appropriately and accordingly, He will honor the other side of that covenant, right? And if you're familiar with the Noahic covenant or the Davidic covenant, if you're familiar with the Abrahamic covenant or even the Adamic covenant, then you will understand what is to come of our end of the deal, right? Because we have an expected responsibility on our end. I think we talked about that with covenants and vows and promises, right? And most of us, I hate to say this, but for most of us, when we teach from the standpoint of the prosperity, when we teach from the concept of being able to have the abundance and the overflow and the things of the sort, a lot of us, we teach from being able to receive because we're connected, but we don't go along with the rest of it, which actually gets into the notion of, the responsibilities that we have. We'll gloss over that part. Like, we have a responsibility and we're supposed to follow the principles. Wow. And that's kind of it, right? But the reality is that aspect, the stuff that we're supposed to do, right? Honoring our end of the covenant is, the more important thing. Yes, God is going to do what He said He's going to do. And yes, we can bring into remembrance what it is that He said in His word. And I know we say that a lot, but we have to know the word more so to know what we're supposed to do in accordance with His will and purpose. Right? There's no point in me going and telling God to do something that I did one time, and then I'm supposed to expect Him to give me the maximum as a result. We see what that looks like in today's day and age, right? We have the notion and the mindset to believe that anytime we do anything, we're expecting, maximum return on that small investment. I've fallen victim to that. There have been times where, I've utilized different apps. I've utilized different programs and things of the sort where, you put in a little time, a little effort, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you're expecting something major and grand in return. But we forget, again, we forget that it's supposed to be a process, right? I learned this, going through other business ventures, because we're taught so much about trying to get there and getting there fast, right? This is both inside of the body of Christ and outside of the body of Christ. We get so wrapped up in trying to get there that we miss that, again, it's a process, right? It's not going to happen overnight. That's not to say that you can't grow and fast shoot to a certain place, but there's also passages that talk about that, right? And in one of the parables that Jesus talks about in regard to this is, the sowing of the seed on the different types of land. The good soil is the one that we expect to be sowed into, right? It's balanced. It allows for everything to grow appropriately. There's no issue. There's no problem. And everything, when it comes its time, is going to mature appropriately, right? You have your more shallow ground where it looks like it's going to start off really great, right? Because it's taking a hold and it sprouts up super fast, right? But because there's a lack of depth, it can't really go as deep as it really needs to have a solid foundation. So whenever you come across your usual issues and problems, it's going to fall, it's going to crumble. It's not going to grow to the same as the good ground, right? You have your rocky ground, which you might not even get to the point of being able to grow, because you might have your animals come take it away, right? Or you're not even gonna get to that point. You might have some of your seeds next to vines, which the vines might be on good ground too, but because they're having to grow around these things that are hindering it from being able to grow, it's not going to mature appropriately, right? There's too much holding it back, and so those aren't good crops either, right? So being mindful of that, right, speaks volumes. And I know for a lot of us, we want to call ourselves good ground, and we want to talk about being as such. So whenever these good things come about, or we're talking about the stuff happening to us, we want to be I'm honoring my word, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and I'm the good ground. But the reality is, right, if we're fixated on the wrong things, or we're accepting an imbalance, if you will, then we can find ourselves, especially when the storms of life come, we might not be that good ground that we say that we are, right? And we have to be mindful of that, right? And again, that same thing comes from that financial place. Yes, if we're not balanced, if we're not understanding the process of the resource given to us, we can find ourselves in a lot of trouble. And as a matter of fact, that's that you can say that's the basis of Philippians 4:19, right? God will meet our needs according to His glorious riches in Christ Jesus, right? Again, we have a responsibility to play on our end to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to do, but taking into consideration it's His needs, or our needs, not our wants, right? I don't need to be a millionaire. What do I need to be a millionaire for? Right? And I'm not saying this to knock the notion or the idea, right? Because some people might have a calling on their life to be in that realm, and that's okay, right? If that's what your purpose is. But in order to be in that level and being in that place, and I believe I had watched a sermon from Dr. Miles Monroe that kind of hit on this, right? He was, he was a great businessman on top of the minister that he was. One of the things that he talked about was meeting up with different people, high list A-listers, in different different places and connecting with them, again, because of the prestige, that they're going to take into consideration, or that they're going to be, more so drawn into what he might have to say because he is at that level. And I'm not saying that, regular Joe Schmo can't meet up and have that same impact. But again, as Paul so eloquently writes, right, becoming all things to all men that we might save some, we have to bear in mind what our purpose is in going down that path. Right? So if I don't have the tolerance of really dealing with certain types of people, I don't need to put myself in that position. Right? Right? And the same thing goes with, again, meeting what our needs are. What are my real needs? And again, when we talk that prosperity, we talk that financial aspect, right? A lot of us get into, what is it that we really need? Okay, and what exactly are we going to be met with in that regard? Right? A lot of us really talk about having the finances. And I'll admit this too, in my younger years, I was a lot the same. I wanted to, I wanted to have the massive amounts of money, or the the finances to take care of all of the bills. And I'll be honest, even when I was younger, I was like, okay, I know I have my debt. I know my grandmother has her debt. I know my mom has her debt. I know my brothers might have their debts that were soon to come. What if I take care of all of their debts? That'd be cool, right? And not that it's me, it's about me doing it, but just so all of us can have, we have a clean slate. Cool. That sounds nice. That sounds great. Right? That sounds like that could be an awesome thing that, can fix and solve problems. But what we miss when it comes to taking that verse and that mindset or that concept into consideration is, what did we do to get there in the first place? So let's say that I wipe away all of your debt, or I clean up all of your debt, but you have very bad financial practices. It's only going to be a matter of time before you're back in that same place. So all of the help and the resources that I got you into, that got you cleared, you're going to put yourself right back into. I learned that lesson the hard way. So I had, I'd actually gotten, one of my credit cards paid off. And ironically enough, that was the same credit card that I had used when I went on my very last deployment. And I was doing fine with it. I really had no problems with it. But the downside came as to when I got home. I got home from that deployment. To make a long story short, I really sacrificed being able to take care of myself financially, because I was more so wanting to help my ex-wife get herself situated and things of that sort. And I ended up having to live off of that credit card. And the downside to doing that was, because I didn't really have a lot of balance and understanding, I ended up creating a lot more debt. And so when I was able to get myself back on balance and to a certain point, I had that credit card pretty much maxed out in that short period of time, right? And as a result of that, it really caused a lot of stress in my life, right? And so, I'm thinking that, oh God, I need a miracle, I need a financial breakthrough, and this, that, and the third. And, you start kind of doing things out of haste, and you're making decisions out of haste to try to get yourself back into a certain place. And the reality is, that was just terrible mismanagement of resources. And I didn't think about, certain necessities or being able to be more responsible. I was trying to live up to perceptions and everything else. And again, that cost me, right? So yeah, just because I got myself cleared does not mean that I was able to fix certain problems, which, like I said, I call that a lesson learned now. And so, I'm okay, I got you. Makes sense, right? And that is something that we all have to really be honest with ourselves about, right? If we're talking about being able to have the abundance and everything else of the sort, if I'm looking at having all of that stuff wiped out, right? Just think about it from that perspective real quick. If I have all of my debts and all of my, transgressions in that regard cleared, and everything that I had coming in now was, strictly just extra, what would I do then at that point? Right? And for a lot of us, our habits will take over. We might find ourselves making the same decisions that put us in the hole in the first place. And then, we might realize later, we might realize at that point that it was us. We have to fix that. Right? But, God, and God being the God that He is, might want us to go through the process to figure that out before we find ourselves in such a position. As a matter of fact, there's a parable that is referenced that we can utilize that kind of goes into that. Like there was a king, or a lord, if you will, that was looking to clear up all of his debts, right? To close up all the debts that he had. He had a servant that he owed him a massive amount of money, and he could not pay that debt. And he begged and pleaded with this master to clear his debt. He's sorry. He wishes that he had it, and all the typical things that we would do, right? Oh God, I'll pay. I'm sorry. Just wipe away the debt. I got a wife. I got a kid. I got this. I got that. And please don't punish me. And blah blah blah. And so he does, right? And you think about that man that now his debt is paid. But, he's clear. He has nothing to worry about. He has no issues, no problems, whatever. And now he's in the same boat. Now he wants to clear up his debts. And same situation. And instead of him showcasing the same grace that was given to him, he now takes on a different persona. He throws the man in jail. And, that goes pretty deep left center field. And then, of course, the master gets wind of it and essentially confronts the guy, and tells him, hey, since you didn't do what since you couldn't extend the same grace that I extended you, you're now going to go to prison. You're going to pay off your debt in prison, and his debt's paid. How about that? And, you think about that, right? That is pretty powerful when you take into consideration, right, what happens or what can happen when, you're debt free, right? And you're doing so from an unhealed place, right? And for that type of notion, that type of action, right? We might find ourselves doing that. Like I said, I did that in my own situation, and it hurt. It cost me a lot, and I'm having to, I still have to work on, having to rectify that situation. But that was a realistic moment for me right there, right? Realizing like, wow, I really put myself in a position, for lack of, really trying to seek things out from a more balanced perspective. I put myself right back in a hole that I shouldn't have had to put myself into. Okay, lesson learned, right? And it comes with that territory, right? And we have to be mindful of that, okay? We really do have to be mindful of that, because we don't want to hurt ourselves. right? And again, when we're talking about God meeting those needs according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus, again, it's him doing whatever he needs or whatever he sees fit for us to be where we need to be, right? That doesn't always mean that we're going to have a material thing in return, right? I know for a lot of us that's what we're looking for. But even if we do get the material thing, we have to be wise with what we are, what we're doing with it, so that we're able to sustain appropriately, right? That's the big thing, right? As opposed to, really just trying to go out there and we're trying to get everything, but we're not really trying to change, right? Kind of the best of both worlds deal, you know what I mean? Speaking of, let's go ahead and get into the core of this discussion, which I think is going to be very powerful, right? First things first, we want to talk about the stewardship versus ownership, right? We kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, right? But when we talk about being stewards over God's resources, right, we have possession of them because God has given them to us for us to fulfill his will and purpose, right? But we don't outright own these things, right? They're not ours. I know in concept, we take ownership of them because they're in our possession. But think of it like owning a rental, right? Or like leasing a car, right? I'm pretty sure that's a great example, right? Leasing a car. You do everything you're supposed to do with regard to the car. You take it to get it maintained, and you're making sure that everything is good on it. You're making the payments appropriately, so on and so forth. But after a certain amount of time, you're giving that leased car back. Whether to start a new lease for a new car or to potentially do something else, right? And it's the same thing. When we're here, the resources that we're utilizing, they're to serve a purpose. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, all of these things end up going, they're not ours. So we don't have we're not responsible for what happens to them after we're gone. We can leave instructions and things of the sort, but that's, again, those are affairs for other people to have to deal with at that point, right? We're not, this is not our stuff, right? At the end of the day, even when we're doing that, when we're trying to control and hold free to certain things in this realm, when we're gone, we still really don't have the power for it because it's still not ours, right? It's still God's at the end of the day, right? So we have to understand what that looks like, right? Matthew 6, which I love, Matthew 6, really gets into the depth of storing things appropriately, right? We talk about not storing things on this earth because things happen, right? You have the thieves will come, they'll take some of the stuff, or it'll rot over the course of time because you're not using it appropriately. Not only that, but things get kind of rusty or old or corrupt or whatever the case may be. In fact, let's go ahead and read it really quick. So it says, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And you think about that, right? If I'm more focused and concerned and fixated on this financial aspect of life, if I'm more considered about building, the wealth here and not taking care of God's will and purpose, then I'm putting myself in a very precarious spot. And it's not just precarious because I'm thinking about the material gain and again, the finances and the things along that line, but I'll end up justifying why I'm doing this in the first place, right? As a means of being able to say that this is God's will and purpose. And again, that kind of compromise, we can see it play out in a lot of different areas. And as a matter of fact, Jesus talks about that, right? We talk about you can't serve two gods, right? You can't have the love of God and the love of mammon, which is basically the material or the riches, right? And again, that's again one of those reasons why I say we have to be mindful with regard to that kind of thing, right? Because we don't want to put ourselves in a compromising position, because we'll hate one and move towards another, and we don't want to do that. As a matter of fact, I think it's further along in this particular chapter that you find that. And so we don't want to do that, right? We also talk about how in Matthew 12 and 25, a house divided against itself can't stand, right? And I know that was more so talking about the concept of a demon casting itself out of itself, right? But that also applies in just about everything else, right? When you take that into consideration. I do understand, right, that you can't stand on both sides of the fence and expect this thing to work, right? And again, that's one of the things that we have to learn when it comes to that whole notion of the prosperity, if you will, right? We fixate and focus so much on prosperity to the point that we can compromise our own position in following God's will and purpose for the sake of an extra dollar. And what good does that do us? And I'm not saying this to really speak or guilt us into trying to follow God's principles, right? I'm really saying this to enlighten us to really seeing why following God's will and purpose is more important than the finances, right? Because God will provide as He needs to. We don't have to worry about those types of things, which is also emphasized later on in Matthew 6, which where He talks about the raven and how He takes care of the raven, and we don't have to worry about this. In fact, Matthew 6 and 33 talks about seeking first the kingdom of God and all of His righteousness, and all of those things will be added unto us, right? And whatever is being added unto us is, again, to serve a purpose. It's not to go out and floss and flaunt. It's not to go out and to just live in excess. The excess is always utilized for something, right? And that something is not for our enjoyment or pleasure, which we've seen what happens with a lot of our men and women, both in the Word and in the times and the ages that we've studied in history or we live in currently, where people they change, right, as a result of having that excess, right? We can go even further than that, but I don't want to, because I don't want to get myself in any kind of trouble, right? But we do have to understand when it comes to the stewardship of the things that we have, right? We're supposed to be good stewards over what we have in making sure that we're taking care of those resources responsibly, right? That's actually what was given to us in the very beginning. When God gave us this earth, when God gave us the command on what to do on this earth, it was all for the purpose of being good stewards over what we were given. To be fruitful, to multiply, to fill the earth, to subdue it, to have dominion, that's to have knowledge, that's to have insight and control, that's to cultivate the right type of mindset, right? There's no way to really cultivate the right type of mindset if we're fixating our brothers and sisters on compromising principle for prosperity. And again, I'm not saying that we can't have that prosperity, but what a lot of us will do is fast track that aspect of process for the sake of receiving this miracle or this abundance on the other side. And we'll become more fixated on the abundance because we're allowing ourselves to play both sides of the fence. Well, I have X, Y, and Z in debt, and I've been praying to God, and I've been faithful to God, and I've been reading my word, and I've been reading all of the scriptures and passages that talk about, getting what's mine. And, I'm expecting that to happen so I can have all that clear. And again, we miss how the process really allows for us to grow and develop as needed. Right? I have a pastor that I used to follow back when I was stationed in San Diego. The pastor was a very prudent guy. He was a very, very principled man. He was very strong-willed in a lot of cases, and when it came to the finances, he did not budge. he stood on his principles, and in watching him, I was very appreciative of being able to see that. But watching the way that they grew, the church grew, watching the way that they were able to move, and the way that they were able to accrue a certain amount of wealth, if you will. It wasn't something that just happened overnight, right? This is a man that he was very wise with what he had. He invested in certain things. He made sure certain things were taken care of. He knew how to really push the aspect of utilizing this resource as God saw fit to use it, and to allow the seeds that he was sowing to become, manifest appropriately in the different areas. So they went and, just the church location. The story that they used to tell us was, they started off preaching Bible study from their home. And, they had moved into a home. They'd been in that home for a while. And then they were able to rent out a location. And they were in that location for a good little while. And they were able to go from that location to another location, literally up the road. And from that location, they ended up at the church, the location that they're at now. I think there might be a little bit more to it in terms of more locations and things, but it was still a great deal of, them really pushing through all of the the ups and downs of, building their ministry. And it was, it's amazing to see, the same principles that they started off with in the very beginning are the same principles that they live by even now. And, I'm elated to have been a part of that ministry, because, watching the way that they grew over that time, I was like, wow, that's amazing, And then not only that, but then watching them go from the house that they were staying in, they were there for a good little while, into the place that they live now. And it's like, wow, that's even more amazing. But again, it's the same attitude and mindset, right? Or a lot of us, when we see and hear about people living, or growing in that regard, a lot of us talk about them abusing the system or pimping the people and this, that, and the third, kind of, like I talked about earlier with the stand-up. And a lot of those ministers aren't really in that position, right? There are a lot more that do, they do right, and appropriately so. But you also have, some that maybe don't really know how to trust the process, and you're trying to grow faster than you're really needing to. And so as a result, you're putting yourself in a really tight spot, and that can hinder your ability to be able to grow appropriately, and then you're having to, you might have to backtrack, or you might have to start over, and never a good thing, right? Which can always, that can always prove to be fatal in cases, right? We don't want to do that, right? Which leads into the next thing, which is being financially responsible, right? And when we're talking about being good stewards, and we're talking about the element of quote prosperity, it's really more so based out of good stewardship and financial responsibility more than anything, right? And being able to budget is huge, right? And I go back to that pastor, and one of the things that I remember him teaching us was, really principled on, one very simple question: do you really need it? Right? And when you think about that, yeah, there are a lot of things that we want, and you remember being a kid and you wanted everything. Anything your eyes laid on, you wanted it. You wanted that doll, you wanted that ball, you wanted that toy, you wanted that, you wanted that bike, you wanted the car, you wanted the gaming system, you wanted whatever you saw, you wanted it, right? And then you started thinking about, as you might start to get some of the things that you do get. After a while, if you do have it, the thrill might not be there, right? Especially if you're used to getting things, right? You might have too much of a, you might not know how to balance appropriately, so on and so forth, to the point that, now you're having this excess and none of it's being utilized, right? But you're still asking and desiring and wanting for more, right? And that's something that we do kind of learn early on, right? So how then do we navigate through that so that we don't end up, asking for more than what we really need? So again, we have to ask ourselves, do we really need it? Right? And that transparency really allows for us to reflect on and look at where we are in terms of growth in general. Really sit down and think about that. I remember when I was younger, I used to have a thing for cars. I used to have, as a matter of fact, I had a really nice car collection. I had some cars that were real, like in terms of like realistic, in terms, by their make. And then I had some cars that might not have been real, but they were really nice. But they were, I used to treat them with, the utmost of respect. I would make sure that they weren't like being utilized crazy, like, because when you're boys, everything is a competition. Everything is, some of those cars I would not take certain places. I would not take them outside, or I would not put them in, I wouldn't play with them in the dirt. Some of them, I wouldn't even, I would keep them in my room, or I'd keep them somewhere nice. If I were to play with them, I was playing with them in places where it was safe. I wasn't trying to get them too dirty and things of that sort, right? But that was a big thing of mine. And in my younger years, the mindset that I had with regard to those cars was, at some point I would love to have some. I remember one of the packs that I had bought was a 5-pack of Ferraris, and you could imagine what that would look like. Just 5 different types of old school Ferraris, and I had kept those for a long time, and they were really, really nice. They were still pretty pristine by the time I had left to go to college. And I was like, it'd be nice to have a Ferrari. And, one of my favorites was a Porsche 911. It was solid black. It was beautiful. I was like, I would love to have it. And again, like I said, I had all these cars for the longest of time, and I went off to school, and my two younger brothers, when I was gone, they took them and they did what they did with them, and I remember going back, and it was just like, man, I wanted to fight over them, but I'm like, why? Why would I fight over them? Why am I going to argue with you guys about these cars now? You guys have taken them, you've done what you've done with them. And, not only that, but what good is it going to serve me to take them? Like, what am I going to do with them at school? Like, even if I did take them, and some people did do stuff like that, but if I was to do that, what purpose does it serve me? Right, to have all of that, right? And I say all of that to say, at the end of the day, realizing I really didn't need that stuff anymore. Because, again, what good is it going to do me, right? And that's the same kind of mindset that we have to have when it comes to, the importance of being able to budget, right? What do we really need? Do I need this, do I need this massive 70-inch TV if I'm not around to utilize this massive 70-inch TV? And that's not to say that, if I'm going to spend the money on it, it's a bad investment. But let's just say that I work 80 hours a week. If the only time I'm there is, maybe the handful of times that I am at home, I'm watching the TV. Sure, it may be not so bad, right? But if I'm accessing this TV and I'm never around, like I'm always gone, I'm always on the road, then there's no point in me having this large, massive 70-inch TV, right? Maybe I can, maybe I get a 35-inch, 40-inch, just to have something just to watch, if I'm even doing it. I might not even need to do that, right? Or just, small things along that line. And this is what, this is what he would teach us. And I remember, we would have the men's meetings, and that principle alone, right? I sit back and I think about it every once in a while, like, man, that really took me, a long way. Yeah, it was some struggles. Like I said, when I go through the mindset of what I talked about in the beginning, I did ignore a lot of that, right? Because I was, in a certain place, right? We have to be mindful of that too. Emotions will allow us to make some terrible decisions. We don't want to do that, right? Because that can create some bad debt, which that is the next thing that we want to talk about, right? Is avoiding bad debt, right? Good debt is a good thing, but that good debt is more so from the standpoint of, generating assets, but you would have to, you would have to know how to utilize that appropriately, right? That's what a lot of your investors will do, or that's what a lot of your financial gurus might talk about, which if you invest in them, or you talk to them, or you utilize some of their resources, they'll explain to you how to do that, right? And then you can go down that path, which makes sense, right? But again, you want the good debt, right? That's usually tied into property or things along that line, right? As opposed to bad debt, right? Going and buying things that depreciate over time. As a matter of fact, I remember watching a movie called Baby Boy not too long ago, and there was a particular scene where Melvin comes in and he's talking to Jody and his buddy about this type of thing, right? The things to invest in, and he utilizes the term guns and butter, and it's literally the same concept, right? Buying things that depreciate over time, that's considered butter, right? That's cars, that's jewelry, things along that line, because once they're being utilized, their value depreciates. They're not the same, right? And they're not that great of an investment. Whereas, things that do appreciate over time, it's like guns. So, bear that in mind, right? Again, in the same, we're talking about, the bad debt. We want to avoid bad debt, right? We don't want to put, we don't want to invest in utilizing our credit cards far beyond what we're supposed to, right? You're supposed to keep it within a certain limit, right? And that showcases that you know how to manage money appropriately, right? Like I said, it's a lesson learned. I'm like I said, I'm having to work on that myself, but it comes with that territory, right? We also get into, when we stay along that line, we can also talk about, living within our means, right? Just because we have excess does not mean that we should spend said excess, right? And I go back to my pastors in San Diego with regard to that. I'm pretty sure they had opportunities to move forward with things a lot faster, but it's best to be able to have that safe space, that blanket, right? So if that means that you're staying in a space and it looks stagnant because you're not moving, that, again, that's okay, right? Because in the grand scheme of things, if you move too fast, you're going to have to stagnate a lot longer, right, in order to make up for, that, or you might end up finding yourself having to move back because you move too fast, right? I think about the prodigal son with regard to that situation. Yeah, that young man, he left and he thought he was able to take care of himself on his own, and then when he found out that the world, really just devoured him up, he eventually came back home. But, in that process, seeing that, he thought he could do it, and then losing everything in the process, being taken advantage of, moving a lot faster than what he thought, not really understanding certain things, it put him in that spot. And being financially responsible, we have to be mindful of that too, right? Just because I have that excess does not mean I'm supposed to utilize it. Right, I know for a lot of us, we get into, certain types of investment. And when you can invest in things that you can pull out right away, if you're pulling it out and you're not able to replenish it appropriately, or if you're pulling it out and you're not utilizing it appropriately, you can end up causing yourself a lot more damage than anything else. Right, now it's financially irresponsible. Right, Proverbs 21:10. Or 21:20, I'm sorry. The prudent store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down, right? And you're talking about, again, using long before you actually get. And for a lot of us, the mindset that we live in, right, the consensus, the common consensus that I've heard, I've experienced, is our resources are usually gone before we ever get them. Right, I used to hear that a lot growing up. Right, as soon as the paycheck, man, my paycheck gone before I even get it. I gotta pay this. I gotta do this. I gotta do this. I gotta do this. I gotta do this. And it's like, right. And it's like, well, let's just say I did have excess. What would I do with the excess? Right, and a lot of us, when we do get into that place, right, it's that same thing. We're more so gulping our excess down more so than we are storing up, right? Because again, we're not thinking about the concept of what could happen as a result of, say, something happening, right? You go back and look at the story of Joseph, right? Just imagine them, instead of them saving up and storing for 7 years their abundance or their excess, so when they go through the 7 years of their famine, them, instead of them having the whatever to sustain off of, they just blew it all. Now you're talking about a very chaotic environment. You're talking about a society that might crumble and fall, and then who knows what could have happened as a result of that, right? We don't want to put ourselves in that kind of a position. Right, and that is very commonplace, right? A lot of us will do that, right? We'll take a decision, we'll make a decision, we'll step out on something, and we'll do so without really being prudent or responsible enough to think about all of what comes with it, right? Sometimes we might, I need a car, so I'm gonna go. I might go buy a car, and I might buy the car because of the brand name that's on the car. Oh yeah, that's a this, and so I'll get certain types of attention because I'm driving this, and this. But the reality is, I might not have the means to be able to maintain this. So if something happens, I'm in a hole now, and it's going to take a lot more for me to get out of it than it is for me to, be able to utilize this quote asset appropriately. Although cars really aren't considered assets, but you get what I'm saying in that regard. So we don't want to, we want to be financially responsible from that standpoint, because we want to make sure that, again, we're allowing our our resources to be used appropriately. Right, and this is something that, as we're building our own storehouses, allows us to have, but we're not building the excess for the sake of being able to just go out and just enjoy life and just woo, right? We're using it for a specific need, right? This is, and again, if you think about, certain things that we have to deal with, right? Inevitability, one inevitability is death, right? So if knowing that, again, you have resources or things that need to be taken care of, right? Maybe all of your affairs might not be in order, right? All of your assets might not be paid off. So your excess might be utilized to help sustain it, right? You think about sometimes what a husband might do for a wife, right? Continue to have, that they might have built up a storehouse and allow for that storehouse to be utilized for, taking care of that necessity, so that the spouse doesn't have to worry about how all of that stuff's going to be taken care of, because it's already taken care of. Right, again, that excess is used to serve a purpose. We have to be mindful of that, right? When we talk about being financially responsible, right? The excess or whatever we're building in that prosperity is to serve a purpose. It's not to just have and to just go out and be willy-nilly with it, okay? Generosity and tithing is also very important, right? And when we're talking about giving back to God and giving to others, again, we're using this as a means of being able to show our brothers and sisters, again, being able to take care of a need, right? We're all familiar with the root of the particular verse that we talk about with regard to tithing, right? Giving 10%, and that is usually found in Malachi chapter 3 and verse 10, right, where it says, bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house, and prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of the hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven, and pour out a blessing, that there shall be not enough room enough to receive it, right? And then you go back and you think about verses 8 and 9, right, where it says, will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, wherein have I robbed thee? And he says, in tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation. And then of course, we know what that looks like, right? You talk about not being able to give God what belongs to God, which God owns everything, and we know where that goes, right? Which is why he, again, gives us in Malachi 3:10 to bring the meat to the storehouse, right? Take care of him first. You give him what's his first, and he'll take care of you, right? And we kind of, we can sometimes overlook that part, right? Or a lot of us will utilize the tithing and the offering as a means of being able to push our own agendas, but I'm not going to talk about that because that's something completely different at this point. I might talk about it a little bit later, right? But when we're talking about giving back to God, or when we're talking about giving to others, from this concept, right? We're talking about treating the storehouse like it is paying our taxes, right? When we take the concept of what the taxes are supposed to do, right? I'm basically paying the government to ensure that my quality of life is going to be better, right? Making sure the roads are paved, making sure that certain resources are made available, making sure that school systems are safe and they're appropriate for our children to be able to learn and grow and develop and become functioning members of society. We're talking about paying into the government system in terms of law enforcement, right? Making sure that they're properly trained and they're able to have the resources necessary to ensure that we have law and order, right? We're talking about our emergency response systems, right? So that's medical, that's fire, that's also law enforcement, right? Making sure that they have the resources available so that if, in the event that something happens, we have, the appropriate facilities to utilize to send our sick, our injured, our hurt, to go. In the event that something happens to our assets, our homes, our cars, our businesses, we have a means of being able to have damage control appropriately. So, those issues and problems don't spread, and so many other things along that line, right? And that's what the storehouse is supposed to be utilized for in terms of the taxes that we pay. That's no different than what we're doing when we're giving God our 10%, our first fruits, like we talked about earlier. We're allowing Him to utilize that 10% for whatever purpose is necessary, whether that's for us to have favor, so to be able to go places where otherwise we would not be accessible or we wouldn't have access to, right? Think about sometimes we get into places and you're just like, how did I get into this place, right? And we think about God's favor. We talk about God's favor, but a lot of us don't really consider it's not just being faithful, we're also paying for that favor, utilizing the taxes, right, appropriately. And I know that's going to sound strange to a lot of people. What? But again, that favor, right? Because again, that's honoring the system. That is honoring the precepts. That's honoring the rules that is given to us, right? Because we're supposed. You think about the covenants. In the covenants, there were promises that were made. First fruits, anything that I get in increase, I'm giving you back a portion of it. You think about the sacrifices that were made, and what was able to be utilized in terms of what was how the sacrifice was to be divided, right? Things of that sort, right? All of that is necessary, right? And God showcases in all of that. Everything that is being utilized is serving a purpose. And again, there's nothing to be wasted, right? And as we talked about earlier, right, we don't want to store up things here. Sounds nice, but what am I storing up here that I can't utilize, or I can't allow for God to work in His favor for me? Right? We want to be mindful of that, right? We also want to talk about, 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9, where you talk about Paul writing to the Corinthian church about what was going on in Jerusalem at the time. There was a lot of struggle going on. And here it is, the other places where they were ministering and they were evangelizing, they were giving, and they were giving according to what they had. And, to help to rebuild, or to help to give what was, essentially taken away, or what they had lost. And, Paul writing to them and saying to them, hey, whatever you give in that measure, it can be given back to you right? Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, but it'll give unto your bosoms, right? And that's the return on investment, right? And it's to be utilized appropriately, because again, we're allowing for our gift, our sacrifice, and that's really what it is. It's really us being selfless and sacrificing and investing, rightfully so, for the greater good of God's will and purpose being returned back to us, right? And that is a complete difference from the tithing, right? The tithing is a tax, right? And God will utilize that tax how He sees fit. But that investment, God can utilize, and He'll utilize that investment the same way. But you think about being able to give in that regard, and again, you're talking about being able to utilize your resources appropriately, right? So let's say you have an excess to where you can give maybe 10% or 15% of what you might have in excess. You're not going to do anything with it, or maybe, you planned on doing something way later down the line. You can afford to lose that 10-15%. It's not going to hurt you, right? And I know for a lot of us, when we think of sacrificing, we think that the sacrifice is supposed to hurt. It is not necessarily that it's supposed to hurt. It's really a matter of us being able to give, right, as God gives. Right? When you think of the way God gives, like God doesn't give as it's a painful thing. Right? God gives to us generously as He sees fit. But it's Him doing it out of understanding. Again, it's to fulfill His purpose. So if I'm giving, then I have to understand that I'm giving from that same place, right? It doesn't mean that it has to hurt, right? When we make it hurt, that's really us just saying, I really don't want to give it, and that's really more of what the fight and the struggle is I don't want to give it, right? And that's a different story for a different day, but we can go further in a different direction with regard to that. But we do want to be mindful again that when we're tithing, we're giving, we're helping others, we're doing so as God would do for us, right? This is another element of Matthew 22 and 39, I believe it is, or it's either 39 or 29, where He tells us, to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, right? And if I love my neighbor as I love myself, if I consider what I love about myself, or if I consider loving myself, I have to make sure that my needs are met. I'm clothed, I'm bathed, I'm fed, I'm well, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally, I'm well-rounded. And in that same regard, that's what I would be able to do for my fellow man. I'm ensuring that their wellness is taken care of. And it might be that it might have to come from this physical place, right, in giving, in that generosity. And again, being able to meet that need, God will honor that, right? And this is where the cheerful part comes into play, right? Because it means nothing to me, right? Because again, I'm not the owner of this thing. I'm only the steward of it. Being the owner of the thing, yeah, it might hurt a little bit, but if I realize that I'm really more of a steward, and the thing that I'm in possession of really isn't mine, but I am taking care of it as if, as I would say, like I said, at least, then I'm good, right? I'm taking care of it. I'm doing what I need to. I'm ensuring that everything is done appropriately. Yeah, it's going to. I'm going to be honorable and respectful of the resources given to me, and understanding that this is, again, for a greater purpose, right? And that balance, if you will, allows us to not look at the prosperity aspect as, materialism, right? When we think of being financially responsible, we're thinking of again, being able to take care of what's necessary in accordance with God's will and purpose, not going out and trying to become multimillionaires. Like, in that materialism, considering the G5s and the G-Wagons and the 8-bedroom, 12-bedroom mansions and all that stuff, it sounds nice. And I know we have tons and tons of influences that showcase that, right? We have music videos, TV shows, movies, and even our sermons sometimes can reflect that, and that I get it. But we're supposed to, again, align our purpose and our faith with God's purpose and His will, not the material thing. That's, again, that another aspect, if you will, of what was spoken in Matthew 6, 19, 20, and 21, where it's supposed to be about God's principles, not the stuff, right? And in that balance, we understand, again, being good stewards, making sure that we're taking care of the things that we're supposed to take care of in that process, right? Because without that, we will find ourselves, really struggling. And if you look at many of the men and women that were utilized in the Word, a lot of them maybe came up on a lot. They may have grown. They may have developed a lot in terms of riches, and they might have had a lot of great wealth. But many of them also lost and compromised a lot of that. Many of them getting too comfortable. Many of them forgetting why they were there in the first place. Many of them, putting themselves in a position of, just becoming a little bit too greedy, for lack of better words. Right? And we don't want to do that to ourselves. We want to ensure that we are, appropriately utilizing what God has given us. And again, understanding that prosperity is more so geared towards fulfilling his purpose, as opposed to being able to just have an excess just for the sake of going out and traveling and living the quote good life. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't enjoy life. That doesn't mean that we can't have the excess. But again, we're having to be good stewards over those things. Right? So, again, budgeting, right? Being able to put away for a rainy day, being able to put away for, future situations, right? Knowing we're all going to pass away at some point. Things along that line. Being able to have something saved up, on the side for, in case I lose my job, right? Something might happen, right? Sometimes we might work from that standpoint. Maybe taking a step out on faith and walking away from, the workforce to start a new life, right? Maybe realizing that your life's mission isn't to go and make the 7 figures because you're working 80, 90 hours a week and you're not home to take care of the family, or maybe you're starting a ministry, right? And you might want to be able to have a nice enough gap to still take care of everything, whatever the case may be, right? So utilizing what we're given for God's purpose is more so the aspect of being, again, the financially responsible and or prosperous people that we're supposed to be. Right? I think for a lot of us, we look at the word prosperity, and we kind of funnel it into what we see, from the some of the mega guys, and not pointing them out to speak bad on them, or we might look at some of our our idols, quote unquote, or the role models that we look up to, right? I know, great example, for me, I was a huge Jordan fan. Well, when I talk about being a Jordan fan, I really speak more so of his basketball game. I really wasn't concerned about the lifestyle that he lived in terms of the mansions and all of that stuff. I really just enjoyed him as a basketball player and the influence that he had, obviously, on the game, right? But a lot of the lessons my mom would try to teach me in regard to utilizing him as a point of reference or as a means of being able to get me to fall in line, a lot of times would be utilized from some of the more personal things. Like, oh yeah, well, if he was doing this and he was in this position and he was in that place, you would be this and you would be that, and so on and so forth. And like, I get it, but again, my thing is more, I just like to watch him on TV playing ball. I'm not really gonna. And I mean, if he does give me advice, sure, I'm gonna take it because it's my role model and all. But I'm not gonna, put myself in a crazy position of trying to become like him because I don't know what he had to go through in order to be that. Right? Sometimes, and again, speaking on that prosperity aspect, we can do that. Right? We can. We'll compromise. Again, we'll compromise our word. We'll compromise our position, our standing in God's will, for the sake of trying to be what we assume or what we believe that prosperity is. And realistically, when it comes to faith and finance, the understanding the faith in the financial realm is more about fulfilling God's will and purpose than it is about us just having excess and abundance just for the sake of having excess and abundance. Right? We have to be mindful of utilizing the resources appropriately. Right? And I'll close it out with this story real quick. We think about Solomon. Right? Solomon was considered one of the wisest men in the history of all antiquity. And you think about the temple that he built. And I'm pretty sure I've said this before, but I think this is really powerful in the grand scheme of things. But when you think about what he brings to what he brought to the table in building this temple, he built this very, 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 very intricate temple. And when you read in the Bible what he utilized to build this thing, you would have to understand that he would have to have a massive amount of money in order to be able to build this thing. Right? And this was supposed to be a place of worship. Right? But this was a representation of God to, I guess you could say from the understanding of or from the perception of how Solomon viewed it. Right? And if you're going to do that, you're going to go all out to make sure that this place is immaculate. Right? And to utilize that, he would need to have the resources necessary to build that. And of course, God allowed for him to utilize those resources as needed. Right? You think about the movement of Jesus Christ in the New Testament when he's out and he's doing what it is that he's doing. Jesus didn't have a job. He was not, he did not have the means, quote unquote. But in his entourage, if you will, he had, his disciples. They were able to go and utilize funding, but then they also had a group of women who were also a part of his entourage. Three of the more common, one was one of Herod's assistants' wives, which she funded the movement, which you can imagine why King Herod felt a certain kind of way about. And I think his name was Herod. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that one. I'm sorry. But you could see why the king would have an issue with him regarding Jesus, because why is my assistant's wife funding him, not me? You know, there was another spouse. I can't remember who she was in particular, but she was also there. She funded a lot of the movement, and then Mary Magdalene, Martha's sister. She had an encounter with him. She saw that he was who he was, and she was all in. And she also funded a lot of the movement. So Jesus was able to do what he could do because he had people that invested in the movement. They would go and, get the provisions, buy things as necessary, whatever the case may be, so they could move around as need be, right? So so from the whole dynamic, I think, for a lot of us, when we talk about the movement, and I go back to, again, the comedian from the very beginning, there's nothing that can be done without that kind of transaction. But understand, again, the purpose behind what it's being used for. Right? Most of the men and women that were following or doing what God instructed for them to do, they had provisions that allowed them to go out and do the things that they did. They weren't poor. Right? It just they weren't viewed the same way that we would see guys in today's day and age. Right? And again, in summarizing all of that, we're utilizing the resources, again, to fulfill God's will and purpose. So moving forward, I wouldn't necessarily call the movement of us trying to be, in terms of financial abundance, if you will, I wouldn't call it prosperity. I would call it really faith and finance. Right? Financial wisdom, I think, would be more appropriate than prosperity. I would move to change that more so because of the way that prosperity is perceived in this day and age. Right? We're pushing it so much so, and we've corrupted the way that it's perceived to the point that, it is time. It's high time to change that. Right? We want to be financially wise more than anything. Right? Being able to use our tools necessary. We want to honor our Father with our wealth, giving him our first fruits. We want to remember that it's him giving us all of this in the first place, and we're doing so as a result of following his principles. We understand that it's us utilizing what it is that he's giving us according to our needs, right? In grand scheme of things, right? We're having to be responsible. We're having to be prudent, right? We're understanding what it is to build, again, as necessary, right? Allowing the resources to be not just stored up, right? And as Matthew 6 talks about, right? We're not just storing these things up for the sake of storing them up, right? I wasn't going to go down that path, but there's a lot of documentaries that have been out with you've seen some drug lords or those that have maybe in certain aspects of power control in certain nations that have had copious amounts of money just stashed and stored in places, right? And in them having all of this excess and abundance, they can't even use it, right? You might not be able to use it because you have to launder it, or you just have so much of it that you don't even remember that you have it, right? And so just imagine what that looks like too. Right? So we want to understand that we're building as need be for fulfilling God's will and purpose, God's plan. So let's rewire this prosperity, quote unquote, be more financially wise, as opposed to chasing after the prosperity, because that prosperity in real time is not this off course. We say we want to be in alignment, let's align appropriately. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for the opportunity to teach us about financial wisdom. I pray, Father, that we break from the misconception that we have to be poor, or we live under the misconception that we can't be financially responsible, but we're able to become good stewards over the resources that you've given us. I pray, Father, that we also get over the misconception that we have to be, we have to be prosperous from the standpoint of being, chasing after the billionaire lifestyle. We pray a lot about financial miracles and financial blessings. We don't talk about utilizing the wisdom necessary to build as appropriate, or utilize the resources as you see fit. I pray, Father, that we're able to be good stewards, that we're able to give and understand why we're giving, and not just going through the motions of giving our 10% to the storehouse, and giving and helping our brothers and sisters the way that you give and help us to get where we are, or where you want us to be. I pray, Father, that your will be done in each and every one of our lives, God. I pray, Father, that we continue to strive for being good stewards, well-rounded stewards, in terms of finances, in terms of health, in terms of our mental well-being, in terms of our physical well-being, that we can showcase what it looks like to be the ministers, the commissioned men and women, the disciples that you've called us to be in terms of your will and purpose. I thank you, Father, for everything. All these things I ask in your holy and heavenly name. Your will be done. Amen. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking the time to come out and studying with us today on, again, faith and finances, financial wisdom. I think that this is a very important topic. I really do think that we really have to break this down. We really have to get into understanding faith and financial wisdom. I think we have to get out of the narrative of pushing and preaching prosperity to the point where we're getting ourselves, again, knocked off course. We're getting ourselves put into a position of compromise, right? Because we're trying so hard to be, the guys that we see on TV, or we want to live that good life, and not realizing that we have responsibilities at the home front. Being able to take care of self, being able to take care of our brothers and sisters, being able to take care of our family, being able to take care of those that might not be able to take care of themselves. I pray that this all finds you guys well. I pray that you guys are able to find your peace. I pray you're able to find your purpose. I pray that you're able to find your success. Until next time, this is the Rebuild Podcast, and I love you all. Peace.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. Tune in weekly as we dive into topics such as finding your calling, overcoming obstacles, building resilience, and strengthening your relationship with God. If you're ready to embark on a transformative journey of faith and personal growth, then join us on the Rebuild Podcast. Together, let's build a solid foundation that aligns with God's will and leads us to a life of purpose and fulfillment.